This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to make some updates and upgrades to our Boros partner commander deck featuring Rograkh, son of Rohgahh, and Akiri, Line-Slinger. Hello and welcome to another installment of our Up and Up series. Today we are going to update and upgrade our Rograkh and Akiri Boros Equipment Matters EDH deck. We've got a few cards going in and a few cards coming out, and we're going to take the Vorthos stance within this build. If you've been following this deck at home throughout its lifetime here at MTG Burgeoning, you know that the last time that we made an appearance on the Up and Up series, we decided to take out one of the swords because, well, let's face it, we were stuck in a game. And, well, we're going to explain that a little bit more as we move along. And I think we did mention during that time that if we were ever able to get the entire cycle of the swords to put into this Equipment Matters deck, that we would revisit the sword going back in. And, well, fans of MTG Burgeoning, that time is now. So let's begin with the first card going in, or should I say the card returning, is Sword of Body and Mind. Now, for here, this gives equipped creature +2/+2 protection from green and blue, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we create a 2/2 a green wolf creature token, and then that player puts the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. The game in question that led to this card's exiling temporarily from the 98 of this partner deck is I had this attached to one of my commanders, and I was playing against a graveyard recursion deck, and I think it was either Slivers or Dragons. It was one of those two that were, the player was using the graveyard a lot to bring these creatures back into play, and I could not get an additional creature onto my side of the battlefield to take this equipment off of my commander so that I can swing for commander damage and not fill that opponent's graveyard at the same time. I did not have enough damage dealt to one-shot the opponent with one of my commanders, and I was fearing putting too many creatures into their graveyard, which would have then end up costing us the game after they decide to cast a mass recursion spell. So in my hubris, in my disappointment, in my emotive response, I decided to take out this equipment because it just made me so angry. Well, now the fates have decided to reconjure and resummon the inner Vorthos in me and put all of the swords back in. So with the Sword of Body and Mind going back in, we are going to take out Rayev Master Smith. And why we're going to do this, well, first, Rayev, it's a Boros creature, 2/2, and whenever a creature we control that's enchanted or equipped attacks, that creature gains double strike until end of turn. That's all that this creature offers. And if you look at the deck list in the description below, you can click on it and check out the deck list. There are so many other ways to enable double strike within the 98 of this deck, and those creatures that do so usually have some additional peripheral benefits or abilities other than just giving the creature double strike. So what we're doing here in order to, build up the cycle of swords and get them all in, we are going to reduce one of our double strike enablers. We're going to slightly weaken that part of our, keyword enhancement for the purposes of creating balance within the Vorthos-led sword cycle. So Rayev is going to come out, which I really don't think we're going to see much of a difference there because, like I said, there are so many other double strike enablers within the 98 that I do not think we're going to miss that card at all. Of course, time will tell, and we'll find out from gameplay and game testing. So, card number 2 going in, and of course the foreshadowing is ever so apparent. It's going to be Sword of Once and Future. Here we have the Dimir Sword, so it gives the equipped creature +2/+2 and protection from blue and black. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we surveil 2, and then we may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 2 or less from our graveyard without paying its mana cost. If a spell would be cast this way, if that spell will be put into our graveyard, we exile it instead. So this one, outside of the buffing and the protection of Dimir colors, the instant and sorcery casting is really probably only going to help with some spot removal with our swords to plowshares, or perhaps, with a path to exile or something like that, because this is not a spell slinging Boros build. But still, in order to have all of the swords in the deck, some concessions on power level and playability are going to have to be made. Again, I haven't played a game with Sword of Once and Future yet, so I don't know how many times we'll end up clicking in with that free spell or whiffing on it. Time will tell. We'll find out, and if we need to, we will come back. With the Dimir sword going in, coming out is going to be a Jeweled Lotus. Now, this is a decision based upon balance, but it's also a decision based upon resources. So if we just drop the Jeweled Lotus down here for a moment, turn one play, generally, if we're lucky, is, a land into a mana rock and maybe into another equipment, at which time we cast Rograkh for nothing. And if that's not the case, then, turn 2 comes up and maybe we get an equipment into play, and then we can get Rograkh into play as well. Also, turn 2, we can also cast Akiri. Having a Jeweled Lotus, if we're lucky to have that in our opening hand, it really does not benefit us much at all. All it could really do is put Akiri into play on turn 1, which in some instances, it's just an 0-3. And yes, we could use the Jeweled Lotus in later turns to help pay down the commander tax accrued by either one of these commanders. But let's face it, in a 2-color deck where we have 2 commanders with a 0 and a 2 mana value respectively, the resources dictate that a Jeweled Lotus would be much more valuable in a monocolored build, of which we have many. So we're going to take out the Jeweled Lotus, not really weakening our mana ramp in any way, because again, 0 and 2 mana values in order to accommodate the cycle of swords. So this Jeweled Lotus will most likely appear in one of our other monocolored EDH decks, where I think it will be much more efficient. All right, we've got 2 cards left going in. The next one is the 10th and final sword. It is the Sword of Forge and Frontier. Here we have the Gruul sword, so equipped creature will get +2/+2 and protection from red and green. And whenever an equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we'll exile the top 2 cards of our library. We may play those cards this turn, and we may play an additional land. So, from a mana ramp perspective, we're getting something that our colors in Boros, they're not completely lacking, but it's not going to be as good as allowing us to play an additional land this turn, especially if we exile 1 or 2 by doing combat damage with Sword of Forge and Frontier. And if we didn't even play a land that turn and we exile 2 lands, guess what? We're putting both of those lands into play. We can also cast them if they're spells, get more of our equipment onto the battlefield. This provides us card advantage. This provides us mana ramp. This is going to be one of the best swords we have, because we've got them all 10 are now in the 98 of this deck. The Sword of Forge and Frontier seems like it's going to be a very, very big hit. With that going in, the card coming out is going to be Strength Testing Hammer. Now, I have had some moments of success with this card for the purposes of drawing cards, because let's face it, in a Voltron build like this, where equipments matter when they're stacked up onto one of our commanders, we're almost always going to have the greatest power of any creature on the battlefield, which allows us to draw that card. However, with the Sword of Forge and Frontier over there, all we got to do is strike for combat damage, which is what this deck is built for when we have our equipment attached to our commanders, and we're going to have access to 2 cards each turn that are exiled off the top of our library, as opposed to drawing the 1. So for the purposes of making our deck more threatening, while also trying to get all 10 swords into the 98, the Sword of Forge and Frontier is going to be better overall than the Strength Testing Hammer in this particular build, in the vacuum of this swap. We're going to go on that. We're going to see what happens. All right, the last card going in, a card that was absolutely perfectly made for this Boros build. Of course, it's going to be Nahiri, Forged in Fury. She's a 5/4 for foreign Boros colors, but she has affinity for equipment, which means she's going to cast one generic mana less to cast for each equipment we control. We should have very little trouble casting her for a red and a white mana. And whenever an equipped creature we control attacks, we exile the top card of our library, and we may play that card this turn, so that's similar to the last sword we were talking about, and if it were an equipment spell, we may cast it without paying its mana cost. That is absolutely amazing in a deck that is centered and focused on equipment. So if we can get Nahiri onto our side of the battlefield and then start tipping our creatures sideways to send them into combat, we should be able to flood our side of the battlefield with even more equipment, making our commanders even more threatening, and then closing out the game soon after. With this iteration of Nahiri going in, the card coming out is going to be Astor, Bearer of Blades. Here we have a 4/4 for 2 in Boros colors, and whenever Astor entered the battlefield, we looked at the top 7 cards of our library, and then we may reveal an equipment or vehicle card from among them and put it into our hand. Equipment we control have Equip 1, and then vehicles we control have Crew 1, but we don't have any vehicles in this build. We have multiple other ways in which to minimize or reduce the equip cost of equipment we control. So losing Astor's ability here is not going to impact us at all. And with Astor, its enter the battlefield trigger is just a one-time occurrence, where Nahiri, all we have to do is send some creatures into combat that are equipped, and guess what? We are going to reap the benefits of free equipment spell after free equipment spell. All right, there you have it, MTG Some updates and upgrades to our Boros partner build. Let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.